Thor Love and Thunder is upon us, and I had the opportunity to see it early. Hence, it is now time to see how it measures up. Will it be a bait and switch like Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness? A directionless mess like the Eternals? Or could it be another surprise crowd pleaser like Spider-Man No Way Home? It is time to find out. I will begin this review by disclosing any and all bias I may have had going in, so you can keep that in mind as I give my verdict and go through the good, the bad, and how they measure up against each other. For the bulk of this review, there will be but the mildest of spoilers. Only towards the very end, and after ample warnings, will there maybe be some spoilers of any note. With that, let's begin with my expectations going in. Let me begin by saying that while I grew up a fan of Marvel Comics, I never really read the Thor comics. While Spider-Man and Hulk were readily available during my formative years in my native Norway, Marvel's Thor was not. As such, I know the actual Norse mythology more so than I do the Marvel comics derived from it. Oh, and I also know the Danish Valhalla comics, although that is neither here nor there. Even so, I greatly enjoyed the first Thor movie, as I greatly enjoyed most of the MCU movies released during that time. I didn't even think Thor the Dark World was that bad. I know I am far more forgiving of it than are many others. And Thor Ragnarok, from director Taika Waititi, is, if anything, my favourite of the bunch. I thought the humour in it worked, I loved the visuals with all the references to Jack Kirby. If anything, that is what the Eternals should have looked like, rather than the dull and dreary snorefest that was. But going back to Thor Ragnarok, I also love the music, both the score, which is the best for any Marvel movie to date, and the soundtrack, with Led Zeppelin's Immigrant Song as the signature piece. Upon learning that Taika Waititi would be returning for another Thor movie, my initial reaction was excitement. Emphasis on was in the past tense. Let's be honest here, even the most hardcore of MCU stans have to admit that Phase 4 hasn't been much to write home about, not compared with the 3-phase Infinity Saga which preceded it. I mean, many call this phase bore, and for good reason. The one standout in it thus far has been Spider-Man No Way Home. More or less everything else has been utterly directionless filler, and that is being generous. When almost every single MCU project released in the past 3 years, one way or the other has underwhelmed, that has undeniably done something to my feelings towards the MCU. As I quite honestly went into this movie expecting to be disappointed. While I enjoyed what director Taika Waititi did in his previous Thor movie, I went into this one worried that he would muck it up. Not only did this movie skip decades worth of what I hear is excellent Thor stories in order to rush to the all-new, all-different era which killed Marvel Comics. With Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness fresh in mind, I was worried that Taika Waititi's tweet from a couple of years back would prove to be accurate. In short, I went into the movie with some trepidation, and with that established, let's dive into the movie itself. Keeping in mind that I was expecting to be disappointed, I was pleasantly surprised. Thor Love and Thunder absolutely has issues, and I will get into those, but on the whole, the movie is a lot of fun, and therefore the closest thing to a crowd pleaser since Spider-Man No Way Home. Don't get me wrong, Spider-Man No Way Home is leaps and bounds better, but due to the dreary state of everything else, Thor Love and Thunder is still the second best installment of Phase 4. In the MCU as a whole, I guess I'd rank it somewhere in the middle, and I still don't know exactly where I'd place it among the Thor movies, but behind Ragnarok and the first movie, that is for certain. Without going into spoilers beyond what is already in the trailers, let's explore what worked. First and foremost, this is Thor's movie, very much so. Lady Thor never sidelines him, and Jane Foster's arc actually works within the context of the movie. The story begins with a montage of where Thor has been since we last saw him, namely with the Guardians of the Galaxy. That was a pretty strong intro, and we're told that together, Thor and the Guardians went on many adventures. And I still can't help but feel I would have preferred to see some of those movies before seeing this story. But this story it is, and luckily Christian Bale is fantastic as the movie's villain, Gorr, the Slayer of the Gods. This enables director Taika Waititi to introduce us to a bunch of gods from the other pantheons beyond the Norse, both imagined for the movie as well as other real pantheons, like the Greek pantheon. And I have to say, I really enjoyed Russell Crowe's performance as Zeus, the high god of the Greek pantheon. Zeus has never been more Greek than what Crowe makes him, and it is perfect. The only thing I did not like was Thor fangirling about what an inspiration Zeus was to him, but I can't forgive it, because from a superficial academic point of view, Snorre Sturlason probably did get some level of inspiration from the Greek pantheon when he wrote down the Prose Edda, one of the Norse sources. But there are other, older sources as well, and circumstantial evidence based on those suggests that the deities of the Norse pantheon may predate the ones from the Greek pantheon. But that is neither here nor there. The Norseman in me did enjoy Thor demonstrating which is the superior pantheon though. Something else the Norseman in me enjoyed was seeing more of New Asgard, located in Tønsberg, Norway. Residing there are the Asgardian actors from Thor Ragnarok, now acting out the events of Thor Ragnarok. Really enjoyed who they had playing Hela, that was a nice surprise. Like Ragnarok, the movie both looks and sounds great. Some of the outfits that looked rather wonky in stills do work within the context of the movie. And Guns N' Roses, represented by Axl Rose, is practically a character in the movie. Spoiler alert, no really, Heimdall's son wants to identify as Axl and insists to be referred to as such. Normally, that's something I'd put in the bad column, but seeing as Heimdall for some reason saw fit to name his son Astrid, which is a girl's name, I'll give the boy a pass for wanting to be called Axl instead. On that note, I very much so regret that things have gotten to the point where how woke is it now has to be part of any decent review, but here we are. Disney's not-so-secret agenda is on display here, but it is very subtle. Valkyrie, who identifies as the king of New Asgard rather than queen, is obviously into the ladies, which we all knew anyway. Korg finds a partner, and I guess like Mocklans in the Orville, Rockmen generally only come as men. Outside of talk of rainbows and bringing color, there really is no more. With that established, let's move on to the bad. As indicated in the trailers, after living for 1,000 years, Thor still feels this hippie need to find himself, so the other Guardians are kind of fed up with him, and when he responds to a friend in need, the Guardians let him take off on his own, in a rather douchebaggy kind of way. In fact, the Guardians in general, and Star-Lord in particular, treat Thor like crap, and they look all the worse for it. I guess this concept of the Guardians as a bunch of misfits together making up a family really only applies in movies written and directed by James Gunn. Also, I won't say what the title Love and Thunder refers to, but I thought it was lame, and not entirely without issue. The worst, though, is ironically related to what is also best, namely the humor. In Thor Ragnarok, Waititi walked a fine line, but here he stepped over it. Without spoilers, I can best describe it with another movie. You know how in Batman Forever, many audiences kind of enjoyed the increased color and playfulness, so director Joel Schumacher went completely overboard with Batman and Robin. That's kind of what Taika Waititi did here. If Thor Ragnarok was Batman Forever, then Thor Love and Thunder is Batman and Robin. It went that far overboard, only it still has some fun and some redeeming parts to it. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments.